I met Richie at a beach cleanup event, where I immediately noticed his leadership. He was organizing volunteers, clipboard in hand, making light of the situation while still taking charge. I signed up for his group, and by the end of the day, covered in sand and exhausted from our efforts, we exchanged numbers. 3 days later, we had our first date, and it felt like we'd known each other forever. We both worked in marketing. I handled social media campaigns, and Richie specialized in digital advertising. Our weekends were filled with hikes, exploring new restaurants, and binge-watching those popular true crime documentaries. We seemed perfectly matched. From the start, Richie knew I was politically active, a trait ingrained in me from my childhood. My parents had taken me to my first protest when I was just 14, and fighting for social justice was a core part of my identity. Richie respected this, even if he didn't share my level of passion. The first 6 months of our relationship were idyllic until I met his family. They lived in a large suburban home, with American flags adorning the porch and a shrine to Reagan in his father's office. His mother kept probing about when I would settle down and focus on family, which made dinner awkward. Richie would just smile, saying they meant well. Coming from a different generation, I tried to adjust. I really did. But the dinners became a chore, and when I suggested skipping them occasionally, Richie's expression would harden. "Family is important to me," he'd say, asking me to try harder. Thanksgiving was the turning point. His uncle started a conversation about immigration, using terms that made my skin crawl. His brother-in-law chimed in about those people taking jobs. I waited for Richie to defend our shared values, but he just sat there, occasionally changing the subject. When his father criticized snowflakes, I couldn't stay silent. Actually, I interjected. Studies show diversity programs benefit everyone. The room fell silent. On the drive home, I confronted Richie. "Why didn't you say anything?" He sighed, explaining it was easier not to engage, that his family wouldn't change their minds. This pattern continued. Richie seemed to morph around his family, becoming passive, agreeable, a version of himself I barely recognized. I noticed him liking a cousin's post about traditional family values on social media, which led to another argument. "It's not worth fighting over every little thing," he'd say, but to me, these weren't little things. They were fundamental. The tension reached its peak when I overheard him laughing on the phone with his mother about my hippie friends. That night, I confronted him. "Who are you?" I asked, feeling like I was seeing a stranger. I made my decision. We needed to talk, because things couldn't continue like this. I loved Richie, but I couldn't be with someone who wouldn't stand up for what's right, especially not his family. In the conversation, I gave him an ultimatum. It's either your family or me. I thought I was fighting for our relationship, for him to be his true self, free from his family's toxic influence. But Richie's response was calm, almost attached. He didn't argue, he just said, "I hear you," and went to bed. Over the next few days, Richie was unusually quiet. I thought he was wrestling with a decision, but he had already made up his mind. One morning, he simply said, "We need to talk." He asked if I would cut ties with my family, if he demanded it. I couldn't answer yes. My parents, though not perfect, didn't support harmful ideologies. Richie then stated his decision. He wouldn't cut ties with his family, and he wouldn't be with someone who asked him to make such a choice. He had already arranged to move out, having spoken to our landlord and packed his essentials. As he handed me his key at the door, he said, "I hope you find what you're looking for," with sincerity that cut deeper than anger would have. Watching him leave, I felt a mix of shock and realization. I had tried to control him, to make him choose me over his family, not realizing that love doesn't work that way. Weeks passed, and I saw him living his life, happy and unchanged, while I was left to grapple with the consequences of my ultimatum. I realized Richie knew who he was all along, and he didn't need to prove his values through confrontation. He was firm in his boundaries, something I hadn't respected. Now, reflecting on it all, I see that those words, "It's either your family or me," cost me more than I ever imagined. Not because I lost a battle, but because I never should have started that war. I learned that love should not demand such choices. It should embrace the whole person, family included.